Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today I'm joined by my good friend Kevin Gamble. He and I are going to discuss a topic, but to kick things off, I would like to see if Kevin has anything new he'd like to discuss and if he has any questions about content on the channel. So take it away, Kev.
Well, thanks, Tris. Good to be here again. Thanks for having me. And I do have a couple questions about some of your recent content. Wanted to just get into a little bit more of it. You had a recent video, which I thought was great, about vintage pedal mods. In this case, putting in true bypass switches, which is a really great mod with a really obvious upside and an immediate benefit. And it made me wonder if you've done any modifications that you either actually regret or that maybe just didn't turn out to be worth the time and trouble based on what they looked like on paper.
I certainly have had a number of mods that I would not repeat. I would say that I've come across things like, ground lifts on amplifiers and, minor changes in capacitor values and things like that, people discussed on the internet and they're just like, wow, this will change really change the tone of your pedal or your amp or your overall signal chain. And sometimes those things just don't work out. I don't know if I would say I regret those kind of things, but definitely I do not repeat them. There are certain mods that are no-brainer mods, like the passive treble bass EQ circuit that I love to use in both pedals, guitars, and amplifiers. I think that it's a very powerful tool. As far as mods that I have shown on the channel, I only put things up for the most part, except for the ground lift on the Pro Junior video, which I do advise people not to do. For the most part, I don't publish anything that isn't something that is tried and true. But there definitely is a trail of things, that I have tried that I'm just kind of like, not so much. You replace a diode here or, put an LED in to replace something. And you may get a little bit of a difference, but usually there are things sometimes that I just like, well, that was fun to do, but I'm not going to waste my time doing it again. And I think that most people will end up with that same kind of journey. There's kind of no warning you can give somebody where it's just like, don't do this. I mean, I think people just kind of have to try stuff and see what works for them.
Yeah, part of the journey of discovery and, going back to the things that you have found most useful, it can be a process of starting off with where you are, what you need that you don't have, not just what hypothetically sounds good, and what are the established available things that can get you that. And some of the mods you just talked about are really accessible, straightforward to do, and have a clear upside. So, speaking of that, I had one thing I wanted to ask you about. Considering doing a mod on an old instrument of mine, I've got this old late 70s Yamaha BB1000. Great, P-bass style bass guitar. Nothing really wrong with it at all, but I was thinking about adding a jazz pickup in the bridge position to get more of that PJ sound, which on some old Yamaha sounds really great. And the main reason I'm thinking about doing it on this instrument is I found that somebody had actually modded the pickups by inside the Yamaha pickup casings, replacing the pickups with Fender, probably Seymour Duncan Fender P-bass pickups. And the electronics part, I know I'm well equipped for that, but I have not routed a body space for a pickup before. In the absence of having a router, which I currently don't have, what are some of the tools you would say would be most essential to have for digging in and undertaking a project like that, just to get the pickup in place and the opening to the control cavity sorted out?
Well, you really only need two tools. You need a variable speed drill that you trust and that you feel really comfortable with and can control. You need a bit that is large enough to remove a fair amount of material so that you can, you want to outline, take an old J-bass pickup cover, stick it on the body, position it where, the strings are in the right place and you have it exactly where you want it. draw an outline with a dry erase marker. You can even use Sharpie and Windex to get rid of the Sharpie too, since it's a poly finish on that, I believe. So you mark the opening. You'd use the drill. You flag the bit so you don't go too deep. Remove as much material as you can with the drill, including your 4 little holes for the screw adjustments for the J-bass style pickup. Get all of that in, and then you just need a really sharp chisel that you also feel comfortable with to really clean up those edges. And then, of course, you could always do a little sandpaper and stuff like that. But if your chisel is super sharp and you have a steady hand and really take your time, you shouldn't need to do much more than that. And then a long bit to get your control cavity, to get from the pickup, cavity to your control cavity, so you can run your wire. And I know that sounds, pretty easy the way that I said it, but it's a time. It'll take time. It'll take time to do right, and you got to watch for chip out and things like that. So you could put, tape over the body, where you're going to be drilling. That'll help. And even if you do get a little chip out, you can always color match or go back and find, if a big piece happens to come out, you can glue those back in and just buff them and make it as clean as you can. But there's some risk involved, but I'd say it's a good entry point though for you to do your first route.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for that, covering those basics. I haven't committed to it yet, but if I go through with it, I'll bring it up on a later discussion and let everyone know how it went.
Well, you'll take pictures.
Yes, yeah.
So you can
carefully document it along the way.
Because that would be something of value for people to see.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we gotta share that DIY learning along the way. And another thing I wanted to mention that you had brought up on a short you did recently was an automotive product to use on your guitar. In this case, it was cutting compound related to a guitar finish. It was a pretty quick introduction to the concept, but could you explain a little bit about what stage of the process that would be used in and how you actually go about using it on the guitar?
Sure. So it was Meguiar's, diamond cut ultrafine compound, commonly used to take clouding out of headlights, headlight covers, or the finish on your car. Kind of bring back the finish. You can also use it on finished instruments to bring back clouded finishes with lots of swirl or really fine scratches. It will take those out. If you're finishing a guitar at home, it would be the final step of the process. It would be after you've done all your sand, all your wet sanding with your 1500 and 2000 grit sandpaper, and it would be just the same as if you were going to head to a buffing wheel to go ahead, or an angle grinder with a buffing bit on it. It would be at that stage in the process. It would be the final bit. You just take it, put it on a paper towel, and you just start circular motions with your hand, and you can do as many coats as you want to get it as shiny as you want. And the cool thing about it is you don't have to have any sort of special equipment to, do the final buff on your guitar. You can also have varying degrees of mirror shine. If you want it to have a relic look, you can go light with it. If you want to really have a mirror finish, you can get that too if you take enough time. So that's when you'd use it. Use it at the very end. It would be the last thing that you do to the guitar.
Great. Well, that sounds like a pretty accessible, straightforward DIY thing for people to try out. As long as it sounds like the main caution would be not to go too far necessarily with it, but it sounds like it might be kind of hard to do that, and pretty easy to manage, just getting that shine and getting some of those superficial swirls and scratches out would be an available thing for people to experiment with without much downside.
Yeah, the finish on the guitar would have to be ridiculously thin for you to, just using your hand and circular motion to actually go through to your color. It should not happen, and if it does, then you need to go back to clear coat anyway. Kind of, put a few more.
Great. So. Well, those are a couple things that were on my mind, looking at some of the recent content. So what's on your mind as far as a general new topic to talk about?
Well, the topic today that I'd like to discuss is the kind of outsized amount of space and influence that particular artists, kind of still occupy in both the music and guitar space. I'm talking about, iconic artists from, as far back as the 50s through the 60s and into the 70s even, um, that seem to dominate so much content and dominate so much product, and just so much just space in general, where we're still discussing them. We're still discussing, buying signature guitars with their names on them, or other products with their names on them. I mean, if people can't figure it out at this point, I'm talking about, your Pages, your Claptons, the Hendrix, thing, and Jeff Beck, and all the people that occupy, even Eddie Van Halen to a certain extent, occupying a tremendous amount of space. I get the influence. I understand that people still love to enjoy these things, but there's a lot of other stuff that happened during those time periods. There's a lot of things happening now. There's a lot of things that have happened since then that have been lost in the decades. There's all sorts of players and little, sub movements I could talk about, but that's not the point of this particular topic. We will go into those things, I'm sure, in other videos, but just the fact that, there is just so much content out there that is dominated still by a relative handful of people. And I just kind of wanted to get your take on it. Is it a market thing? Is it because that sells? Is it, because they are that important? Or has just nothing come along to knock them out of the way? Yeah,
these are really good questions, and there are so many things that come into play, more than we have the ability to cover in one talk. But it does kind of feel like the model over time has been consistent, where the instruments themselves, the design of them, the marketing of them, the coverage of musicians and guitarists and the press has all kind of emerged out of the same space as those musicians themselves. So you take it back to especially the 60s, all these things kind of emerged together, and they were all complementary to one another. And it's been the system was set up to recognize what was going on in the moment then, not necessarily to reconcile itself with everything coming along since then. And while a lot has been marginalized and overlooked along the way, and that's always been an element of it, it does seem like the guitar industry, the music press industry, even the radio and pop culture in general, has been able to incorporate waves of new inputs. In the 80s, we had the shred guitarists and the neoclassical and the hair metal guitarists. And in the 90s, we had the emergence of grunge and kind of a revisiting of that closer to a punk aesthetic and things like that. These were all scenes that were fairly cohesive, fairly geographically, originating, and were something that could be turned into a narrative that mm-hmm. had some cohesion and made sense. And it seems like maybe after the 90s and into the 2000s, there was a bit more of that fragmentation when we went into, Napster and streaming, and the music industry as we knew it fragmented. Maybe there was a loss of an ability to package what was happening as a story or a cohesive narrative. And maybe what has turned into the YouTube scene for guitarists is so varied and fragmented that it's really hard to comparatively to build something iconic out of it, because really a lot of the current artists, there are a lot of exciting guitarists out there these days, but they're not really being given the platforms to become iconic, even if they're capable of, which we haven't really seen for sure, and with very personal vocabularies of music, not necessarily connected to traditions like blues or jazz or anything like that. And so, there are some obstacles, I think, to kind of making a cohesive replacement for the old icons. But, is the industry set up in a way where it's not trying, where it's focused on playing it safe and selling to the existing audience and giving us, the equivalent of musical comfort food? It's hard to say what point in that sort of closed loop needs to be broken into for this to change.
Yeah, there was something that Slash did in an interview not too long ago where he was talking about, there can't be rock stars anymore. And that's why people hang on to the old rock stars. So, it's just like, oh, now those people really had it. And, I would argue that that there's a lot of truth to that idea, and you just described it completely. We don't need to go over what you just said, because it's the truth. It is fragmented, and it's hard, if not impossible in the current marketplace, to create another icon. A lot of people say that John Mayer was the last, guitar hero, and there will never be another guitar hero, or Jack White, something like that, early 2000s. And then with the advent of the YouTube universe, with access to everything all the time, and a lot of niche things that, people find their little tribe and they stay in their tribe, you're not necessarily going to see, them having signature guitars from Gibson and Fender, So that's why we see this constant regurgitation of the iconic artist perpetually being, put out there, and including some grunt, there's Mike McCready, and there's always the Kurt Cobain stuff that's floating around too, that gets lots and lots of time. But I think that, and this is something I just thought of as I was listening to you speak, is that I guess that what we have to do, if we don't want to be inundated by these icons of the past and kind of like just recycling the same musical information over and over and over again, we do have to kind of take it upon ourselves to either find a tribe to be interested in, or promote those people who didn't get their time in the line, don't get that kind of attention. The people that, my guitar heroes that pop into my mind immediately would be like, to a lesser extent, Leslie West, he gets a certain amount of coverage, but I mean, certainly as good as any of the British blues players, if not far superior in many ways. I think of Robert Fripp. I think of Steve Hackett. I think of Steve Howe, the prog people from the, and and then there's all the people in the 80s that were doing really cool, innovative things. Greg Ginn with his Avant Noise. There's all sorts of different players that, and maybe that's like what our job is, like you've done with some of the, you've presented some ideas here and some bands here, just in these conversations we have, where we talk about things beyond those things. And I think that what just bums me out is that sometimes I go to a lot of the YouTube channels that I enjoy watching, and it's just like, oh great, now this one's about Clapton, this one's about Page, this one's about Hendrix, and I'm like, I don't care. I've covered that ground. We covered that ground as teenagers. Yeah, sure, we learned some of that stuff, but there's just so much else to explore. And I would love to see more interesting, stuff being made, rather than regurgitating, oh, well, here's another, Slash Les Paul or whatever it is that we want to talk about. And so, I don't know, maybe I answered my own question right there. What are your thoughts about what I just threw out there?
Well, I think, there's a lot of good stuff in there, and it's not to devalue any of, this stuff from the past. Like, for example, Jeff Beck. I mean, talk about somebody who still is every bit worth digging into, and looking at the inventiveness and sort of singular approach he took to filtering his influences and turning it into something new every time he picked up a guitar. So it's not to question the value of those things, but it does seem like we're in a time now where being a fan is more DIY than it ever was, because what we're being presented with by the prevailing culture isn't necessarily connected to something of value. And, we don't need to name names about current, pop icons and so forth, but it does feel like we're on our own when it comes to these things, whether it's promoting new things that are emerging now, or not letting the things that are valuable slip through the kind of memory hole that of the pre-internet age. The time periods you talked about have so many wonderful artists that may not necessarily be consistently available on streaming. That's a big thing about things like Spotify, is it's got big holes in it. It has big gaps in it. And so it really is incumbent on fans to kind of keep that awareness going and share those influences and make it kind of a grassroots scene, reconstituting itself and valuing inventiveness and creativity, and not just looking to the same familiar icons or even the same familiar songs by the familiar icons? What are the overlooked songs by, Cream, and what are the overlooked, side projects of so many of the iconic things that we can dig into and promote and find the value in. And it's hard to say where that leads. It's hard to say when, this generation of musicians passes on and the people who have been covering them for decades passes on, what's
Which
going
is
to
coming.
happen next. Yeah,
I mean, it's coming.
yeah, it is very much coming. It's imminent. And so, the gap may not be filled for us. We may have to be as active as we can in filling that gap ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. And there are a lot of new artists and new guitarists out there. They're doing very exciting things. There's the whole cohort of people who use extended range instruments, fanned frets, all sorts of 7 and 8 string guitars that are doing really interesting stuff that I find a lot, and not all of it's just shred. A lot of it is quite creative, and it's out there, and I think that there are more companies who are beginning to cater a little bit more to beyond Ibanez, beyond the usual suspects in the modeler community, who, because a lot of people don't even use amps anymore. But I'm just talking about like product flow of signature things that are always have we always have all this classic rock based stuff, and then I think that there is a slight shift more towards the niche people with some of the gear and things like that. But I think definitely, yeah, we just have to make our choices. But I just wanted to kind of put this topic out there because it just grows tiresome to me. And maybe that's my age. Maybe it's because you people like us have been exposed to it our entire lives. These artists were still relatively young when we were learning about them, and still had lots of career left in front of them, when we discovered them, and now it just seems so played out. So
yeah, and it does seem like it ties back to that kind of familiar theme of we have to vote with our money. We have to vote with our clicks, vote with our time. One vote may not tip the scales in an election, but thousands of them do. And so we can feel an affinity toward music outside of the obvious, but if we're not actively supporting it in some way or another, then who is? And so it really is up to us all the time to keep that support going.
very true. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for joining me. I'm sure that we'll be re-exploring this topic. I want to kind of go into more detail eventually with the two of us. We'll be discussing, I would like to discuss certain scenes and times and things that have been forgotten that shouldn't have been, and we will definitely be doing that. And also just kind of starting to chip away at some of these things that are the iconic. There are lots of great guitarists out there that are not the big five or whatever your list is or whatever the list on the internet is. If you have watched the video to this point, you should subscribe. Why not? It's free. It's fun. You'll find out what we're doing next, and we can grow the channel so that we can become more interactive here at DIY Music. And likes, shares, and we'll see you next time with another conversation. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.